What's that?
That's 230. That's like what I need. At least for
Okay.
so this for
I just didn't want to be holding things up, that's all.
we're with you, yeah. CCF.
Did you upload the PowerPoint or share a desktop?
I'm sharing my desktop right now.
So if I,
So,
okay, you wanted those two. If I go here, do that aka.ms/Azure.
yeah, that was the one I was missing. Right.
But I want the matrix. Where are the matrices? No, I want. The list of blueprints that are on the Trust Center.
Right. We have a link. Do we have a public link for that?
Yes, we do.
Oh, we do. Okay.
Here we go.
There you go. Right there.
Well, that's for CRM. System security plan. All right. So if I
Actually, don't we want that? The SSP is what we want, right? Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Is that right?
yeah.
Switch back to the stupid multi-line.
Oh, you don't like that?
I hate no, because this is what I'm showing on the screen. So we can switch it back. Yeah. Good things like that. Perfect. Thank you.
All right. It makes me a chance to work on something. You bet.
Yes, sir. Yep. Go ahead and turn the mic on. You want the?
Yeah, I'll take the mic.
How's it going? I'll let you get going.
Yeah. We can talk. We can catch up. So, everybody, we're going to get started. I know everybody wants to get together, want to just talk, which is good, networking. So, good morning, everyone. My name is George Linares, and CMS's Chief Technology Officer. So, welcome to the last session of Tech Topics for the year. 2016 is really gone already. 2017. It's already gone. We're in 2018. Wow. Interesting. Almost Christmas. Wow. So in December, we take a break because everybody wants to take a break on that month. So that's been the trend. So we're going to do the same. We'll come back again in January. So we're going to close it today with, one of the latest capabilities that has been added to CMS's sort of set of tools that we have here. It's another cloud. We started this venture with AWS, and now we expanded to Azure, Microsoft. So I'm very excited to have the Microsoft team here, and they're going to sort of go over a lot of the details, what the offering is. And yes, they've received an ATO, so they're in production, they're live, so that's a big one. So kudos to the team, because it's always the tricky part, making sure that we are all in compliance with CMS and federal standards. So thank you for that, and then I'm going to turn it over to the team.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for your time this morning. My name is Blake Badalazzo. I'm the account executive from Microsoft here at Medicare and Medicaid Services. If you've seen my face and you're an integrator over across the street at SSA, I'm also the account executive for Microsoft over there. So just wanted to really quickly express our gratitude, Microsoft's gratitude from folks from OIT and IUSG for the over year-long process and sometimes grind, it might be a good way to describe it, as we were working through the initial implementation of the CMS Microsoft Azure Cloud for Government Enclave. It's kind of fun to say that out loud for me because it's been a long time coming. That ATO process was not simple or easy, but we're happy that we're through that. So for the rest of this period, we've got the Microsoft Federal CTO, Kent Cunningham, with us to take us through kind of a high level. This is Microsoft Azure Cloud for Government as it pertains to services rendered here at CMS. And then we've also got digital architect Jim Fetters, who was a part of the process getting the CMS Mag Enclave to a reality state. And Jim's going to take us through some of the more nitty-gritty Azure Enclave elements here at CMS. Services that are available, some of the workloads we're exploring the use of today, as well as some of the onboarding process. And then we'll kind of finish off the morning with Robert Rickson from IUSG, giving us a real brief overview of the MAG onboarding process through his team at Cloud Services. So I'll turn it back over to our entertainment for the next 2 hours. Thanks, guys.
There you go. Entertainment. I'm not going to sing. You don't have to leave. My name is Kent Cunningham. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the Federal Civilian Government Business at Microsoft. As Blake said, thank you very much for having us here today. Will you go to the agenda, Jim? If we can do that with a mouse, that's handy. Yep. So just quickly, what we plan on doing is I'm going to do kind of an overview of Azure. What are the services that are available through Azure? Kind of an overview of the things that you could do, the technologies that you could take advantage of. I don't know if anyone has actually looked at the numbers, but Azure at Microsoft is $1 billion a month investment. And when you're throwing $1 billion a month at something, services come online pretty quickly. So I want to walk through just kind of an overview of what those things are. We're going to have a demonstration of the service for about 20 or 30 minutes. You'll actually get to see how this works and how it looks, and I think that's when it actually becomes a reality so that you can see a portal and not just PowerPoint slides and those style things. We'll come back to what are some of the specifics about this in government. It's a whole separate environment that we have for government services. There's a different set of rules and regulations that you have to go through to be a member of that cloud. We'll talk a little bit as to how that works. And then we'll do some onboarding discussions. So let me see, Jim, if this works from way over here.
Go for it.
Oh, go ahead. You can give that a shot. So go ahead and move to the next one, please. Yep. So Azure at a high level, Microsoft Cloud altogether, there is or there are a wide variety of services. Azure started as a platform for platform as a service only, and now it is platform as a service, it's infrastructure as a service, and it's software as a service, all together in a single cloud environment for you to choose a la carte workloads, build microservices solutions, leverage it for identity and security monitoring purposes. There's all types of capabilities and functionalities there. If we look at the bottom from a core infrastructure perspective of compute, network, and storage, really compute, network, storage, and identity or security, if you will, that's the core foundation. It's how the vast majority of customers begin to adopt the cloud service. And it gives you the capabilities to either lift and shift applications if you would like. One of the things that you'll see as we go through this is not at all a Microsoft on Microsoft conversation. This may be workloads that were written in one of our languages. This may be really any number of frameworks, languages, third-party databases, applications and services that you might want to be able to leverage and utilize. So you'll have the capabilities to support and drive all of that. From advanced workloads, we're going to go through several of these, but there's everything from Internet of Things tools and capabilities that you can leverage to distributed database services, to large business analytics services, to virtualized desktops delivered directly from the cloud, I'll talk a little bit about identity management and cognitive services and those types of things, the capability to very easily utilize machine learning in applications and how cognitive services can help you do that. If we go up to the top, the tools as well to really help you create, manage, deploy, distribute, patch, any variety of tools and applications are certainly there for you as well. All the way up to mobile application testing and development. We actually literally acquired a company that when you deploy and you want to test mobile applications, we're not testing those against an emulator. You're literally testing them against a rack of iPhones, a rack of Android phones, running different operating systems. So you're not trusting someone's emulator. So you have the options to be able to do that as well as part of the exact same service. Visual Studio, if you haven't seen it in quite some time, is no longer also a tool to just write things in .NET. You can use the language and the framework of your choice. You can publish that straight out to GitHub. You can use that however you would like. So it's a very open environment that you'll see as we go throughout the day. So Jim? Sorry, but since you're there, we'll use you for your excellent button pushing capabilities. This is a marketing slide. I'm sorry we got one in here. The momentum has been really fantastic for us. I mentioned $1 billion a month. I don't guess you spend that unless there's success and demand for the platform. As Blake said, it's been a long time coming for us to be able to stand in front of you today, so we greatly appreciate your support. One thing I will say about this momentum and query is that what this does for us, honestly, is having this type of visibility, this market changing from all of this running on-premise to so much of this running in the cloud, is this visibility gives us the capability to understand better how are our products being used. It gives us the capability to see better what improvements we should make next. And it gives us the opportunity to us to see from a security perspective where our things are rising, maybe in other continents and things around the globe, so that we can see those types of things occurring more quickly, and we can protect and patch and secure our environment faster here in the U.S. because of the things that we see globally that are occurring inside of this environment. So every cabinet level agency today is using our cloud in some fashion, and I think that's a great testament to really Microsoft's investment to government and things we're trying to do to adopt this. I don't know if you're aware, it's our largest vertical globally. We have an enormous commitment to federal government. This is specifically all that Jim does. It's specifically all that I do. I work with all the federal agencies. We separate federal at Microsoft into 3 divisions, which is DoD, National Security Group, and Civilian. And so that's all specifically that we do, and that's all that we'll talk about today. So from an infrastructure as a service perspective, as we think about the different capabilities and how you could actually use Azure to be able to do this, you have the options, of course, to do a native lift and shift if you want to. If you have existing applications on premise, if you have scenarios where things are end-of-lifing, if you have things where you're looking at things from a scale perspective and how do I scale better, you may have seasonal applications from a demand perspective that you'd like to be able to put in an infrastructure as a service environment. You certainly have the option to be able to to do that. You have the option, if you look at the bottom, it says lift and shift for Windows. You have the option there for Linux as well. We do support the capabilities to do things with the Horizon Cloud and offer virtual desktops in that environment. And of course, we support Hyper-V. Containers has become, I'll say this, right, so infrastructure as a service for a lot of our customers is the first way to cloud. It helps us check that mandate box to be able to be cloud first. But at the same time, I think everyone in this room knows it's the most expensive way to consume cloud, right? So it should be a building block or a step as to our long-term evolution to a cloud, to adopt cloud services. And as we get that service there, and then we get network, compute, and storage proper, and we get our security models working, and we get those things working, a lot of our customers then begin to say, how do I take that application and break it apart so that I can save more money, so that I'm not still having to maintain the hypervisor, I'm not still having to maintain the operating system, I'm not responsible for patching that environment. And as we get there, then we begin to look at things moving across the chart like containers, like service fabric. So from a containers environment, Microsoft has a container service. We also are very much a Docker shop. You can go full-blown Kubernetes management if that's something that you would like to do. You can choose the management environment of your choosing. If you want to choose another orchestrator, you can certainly go that route. We have the options to be able to support all of those for you. You see Mesosphere, you can choose Docker Swarm. We can be a full Kubernetes environment. We have our own container service. We offer you a wide variety of choice. And I hope what you'll see as we go through this in the next 20 minutes or so, at least for my section, is that what we want to do across the board is make sure that we're offering you a platform that lets you really use the tools of your choice, use the framework of your choice, use the languages that you're already used to using, and be able to use this cloud service to create and enhance the applications that you're creating. Service fabric for microservices, as we think about how do we get to a lower code or in some cases even a no-code environment for some of these applications, to be able to do this in a microservice environment is a place where we have an enormous investment and strength right now as well. And so these services are certainly capable and available for you as you move forward. And we certainly support, not only when we say Linux, not only do we support Red Hat as an OS, but we support OpenShift, we support Cloud Foundry. It's a very wide, broad, open environment. You can build and design new applications using a variety of services such as our app service. Jim, there's a slide in here in a moment that says, hey, we actually support a Linux app service. There's a Linux or a Windows app service. Again, you can use whatever environment you would like to be able to do that to create the apps and the web app environments. You have the options to be able to use something called DevTest Labs. DevTest Labs is very interesting. It gives you the capability. How many of you have had to wait for weeks before on hardware, or months before, let's start with months, on hardware to just begin testing an application? Right? A few hands up. I had a scenario a couple of years ago where a customer wanted me to test something quite large on our Skype platform. I flew to Redmond. I waited a week and a half for the power to become available in that building so that I could then test the infrastructure. And when I say that now, it sounds as archaic as changing channels on an 8-track tape. Right, when I was in high school. That's just not what we have to do anymore. What DevTest Labs does for us, one of the concerns as people adopt these cloud technologies and they move to DevTest is how do we control cost? How do we give access to someone to an environment so that they can get off the ground very quickly, they can look at an environment very quickly, but how do I control that cost? How you're paid or how you charge for cloud is based on consumption, right, and utilization. And so I want to control maybe the size of servers that you can leverage, how many servers you can leverage, give a budget to an environment so that you don't go over that budget for your dev test environment, be able to look at that charge back and see what that is, and that's exactly what DevTest Labs does for you. It allows you to set those budget limits, it allows you to set servers or environments that people can be able to utilize for their dev tests, and then even move that into production or take that back out if you want. You can even script it so that everything shuts down at night at 10 o'clock at night so that there's no charge for those services when no one's working to help lower your overall cost. Logic Apps is also another way for you to do a lower code or a knower code environment. I think of it as kind of drag and drop of connecting your different environments in a workflow. For example, I could make a small application that says if Jim sends me an email at 2 a.m. and it's marked high availability or high importance, that I want to stick something in another database that alerts a team or what have you, right? Just very simple workflow style things. You have all types of capabilities like that with Logic Apps that you can build on workflow with hundreds of connectors to third-party tools as well. And of course, all types of database services from SQL to Mongo to NoSQL to now our Cosmos DB technology, which is really think of it as a schema-independent database that is fully replicated, that gives you the option for you to have a 5 nines financially backed SLA in the industry for your data availability and reliability. I believe that's a unique thing to Microsoft, and gives you a quite unique environment for you to be able to develop those new applications. And you see across the bottom things like Visual Studio for Mac and those types of services as well, just to remind people that if you want to write your apps in Mac, that's cool with us, and you certainly have those options to be able to do that. I just want to ask if the people in the back can see this slide. If so, you're doing better than me. The idea behind this is to talk about we also have some great capabilities like cognitive services. If you haven't seen cognitive services, I would encourage you as a developer, if you're looking at things like 508 compliance, if you're looking at things like how do I build help desk tools where people could interact with me using natural language, natural speech, things like that. Cognitive services give you that style capability. If you'd like a great example of cognitive services, there's actually, you can go to a Microsoft customer support webpage now, and when you go there, you can say get help, and it brings you to a bot, and you can literally type into that bot, hey, I need to license Windows, or hey, I've corrupted my database, or hey, whatever you're typing today. And it'll walk you through a bot environment that's leveraging cognitive services that we're actually taking in the background and uploading our Premier database in the back end to every night. So it will provide the user back with the best answers to help them in an automated help desk environment, and they're using natural language query, natural language search style capabilities. Cognitive services and bot services help us power that, and we have an awful lot of those with machine language behind them. So if we look at the top, there's language and intelligence ones, there's translator. I don't remember the total number of languages now, but it's something like 25, 30 languages that we do translation into at the moment. And from that language and intelligence translator API actually helps us in Skype today. So Skype has a translator built in which can do audio speech translation as well as text translation. So we can speak in multiple languages back and forth, and it'll do that translation for us. There's a face API. There's even an emotion API where I can look at people and say, do you appear happy or amused or confused or what have you, that you can build those types of services into an environment. There's a custom vision service. Custom vision service, we've just built a solution. You may have seen it in the news a couple of times. Bill Nye the Science Guy did a thing on it. Come on, let's be honest. Bill Nye fans? All right, there you go. I like him too. Bill Nye the Science Guy actually met with a lady who worked on this team, and they created an application that runs on the iPhone at the moment that actually allows someone with vision impairments to be able to use the phone to detect things like what is your facial expression? Do you appear to be happy? Do you appear to be sad? Do you appear to be engaged? They can use it when they are shopping to be able to look at a barcode on something and say, well, the gum you're getting ready to buy is Wrigley Cinnamon instead of Wrigley Spearmint. So they would know they have the right product. They could be able to move forward. So those types of tools and those types of capabilities can be provided by these cognitive services environments. Jim? Again, huge slide to talk about how this is a very open platform. You can use the frameworks and languages of your choice. We have phenomenal capabilities that are growing today in the open source environment. And this really only makes sense, right? Again, we want, cloud is all about making sure that you can use the tools, the resources, the expertise, the knowledge, the install base that you already have. And that's exactly where Microsoft is headed. You'll see that in lots of cases where Microsoft has done things, like even in the Hadoop world, if we've done some things to be able to expand that, and we have, that we take that technology, we open source that right back, and we'll make that available to the Apache framework so that other people can leverage that. It's a very different environment today for us to be able to embrace the open source world, whether that's applications across the board for being able to leverage Drupal, whether it's Cloudera, whether it's being able to write your code in PHP, Node.js, whatever you would like to be able to use and leverage there. So I think you'll see a wide variety of frameworks that you can leverage and tools that you have capabilities for. If you go to infrastructure as a service today, you will see within the marketplace, you'll actually see all of these icons within the marketplace of prepackaged services that you can leverage. But from infrastructure, if you want to say, hey, I want Ubuntu, I want Red Hat, I want SUSE, whatever you would like, you have all of those options for those virtual machines that you can just choose from and go. One of the things that we try to do at Microsoft, and that we've been really focused on since the beginning of our cloud evolution, is this concept of hybrid cloud. And it's kind of interesting that a few years ago, I would see people in the industry say, well, hybrid is not really a cloud model. And now I think everyone in this industry has decided that hybrid is really the only model we're going to be in for quite some time. Right, and that's what Microsoft has tried to do, so that from a hybrid perspective, if you leverage our identity stack, it's the same identity on-premise and in the cloud. From a management perspective, we can manage operating systems, environments, and applications that are on your premise, just the same as we would manage those operating systems and devices and servers that are in the cloud. So from an identity perspective, for example, Azure Active Directory gives you the option not only to provide things like multi-factor auth, HSPD12 compliance, things like that for your own existing applications that you may have in the cloud, but we provide full identity management for those applications that may be in our cloud, on your premises, or even third-party clouds. So there's a wide variety, I think it's some 3,000 applications that we offer federation with today. So if you would like to make sure that when someone joins your organization, that their identity that they have here and their passwords are synchronized, and they leave the organization, that you remove them from their third-party accounts that you may have with Cisco or Salesforce or whatever that third-party environment might be. We give you a full identity management platform to be able to do that. We also now have what's called B2B and B2C style services. So if you're doing business-to-business environments, business-to-consumer environments where they don't actually have an account in your environment, but you want to do things like check it against a Facebook account, check it against a third-party environment to validate who they are, you have those style services if you are rolling out maybe services to the public and you'd like to be able to provide that style authentication. The Azure Security and Management gives you the opportunity to do full evaluation of your applications, again, whether they're sitting in our cloud, on premises, or in third party. I believe we have another slide for a demonstration of that to show you how that actually looks. You have the option to say, look across all of my resources that I have in Azure and on premise. Maybe there's a new vulnerability today. I'll just make something up. There's a new vulnerability in SSL 1.2. We want to look across the entire environment and say, where do I have that deployed? Because I have thousands of applications, and we could look across the entire environment and be able to see that, so that you would know where you need to make your patches and where you need to make modifications to protect yourself. Things like SQL, we have the opportunity to stretch from premises to cloud. You can literally say which portions of your database do you want to go to the cloud, which portions do you want to have on premise, where does that make sense? And again, it's the same environment in both. We can stretch them, we can lift and shift them, we can run it on an IaaS environment, we can run SQL as a PaaS environment if that's something that you would like to do. So you have a wide variety of choices there as you're looking at how do I move data to the cloud, how do I modify these applications so that they can go to cloud. And of course, from a development and DevOps perspective, whether you're writing for what we call Azure Stack, which is a version of Azure that can be placed on your customer premises, or whether you're writing for the cloud version, it's the same environment. So the same tools that you would use across both of those help you with that consistency. From a Visual Studio perspective, I've mentioned some of these capabilities already, but the options are certainly there in Visual Studio to be able to fully create and manage your workflow environment and your development environment. Again, you can write applications in the language and framework of your choice. We do have the Mac and mobile capabilities that I talked about a little bit earlier. You have the option for the back-end services to use this with cloud and offline data, as we mentioned as well. Visual Studio also has the Xamarin capabilities that I mentioned earlier, which is the mobile application testing environment, where we're actually leveraging phones instead of just emulators to be able to tell you what that is. And of course, your option to use third-party and external entities like GitHub for importing code and exporting code are certainly there as well. This is just a screenshot of the web apps on Linux and a reminder that, again, you can use web apps in the Microsoft Cloud. You can use PHP, you can use Java, you can use Node.js, you can use the language and the framework of your choice. This is the first screenshot that we have of what the portal looks like, and this is what Jim will be walking through in just a moment. So you have an option just to kind of get a look and a feel of the portal. The beautiful thing about the portal to me is if you have been in this industry a long time, you remember how in the days you would have to have someone separate who would understand and provision hardware, and then someone else who may come in and do an operating system, and then you would have to do something like stand up the OS and then figure out what you had to build on top of that, and everything was like a next step you had to know. I think they do a great job of kind of workflowing you through this environment and saying, here's some things you might want to consider, like, hey, you just deployed this application, do you want a third-party firewall in front of it? Right? And if you'd like to have the options to be able to deploy a Barracuda firewall or a whatever, insert your vendor here, you can choose one from the marketplace and go that step, and it'll show you those next step items that you might take for your application. So it's a very wizard-driven style environment that I think makes this very simple.
Yep.
From a compliance perspective, this is a heavy investment area for Microsoft. Again, the ATO that is awarded here is a huge step for us. But at the same time, something to realize is that Microsoft is creating this cloud not just for the US government, but we are building cloud services for global governments and global businesses. We have a wide variety of regions which I'll cover. I think we run the second largest private network in the world today. It's second or third largest. We've done everything from run fibers under the Atlantic to we actually now have our own submarines. So that's not the kind of business you think about us being in. But it's an absolutely enormous investment that we're doing at Microsoft to make sure that we can run these networks and data centers. And we're building this environment for global governments, not just US governments. Because of that, you'll see that we have a wide variety of compliance offerings that are both here in the US and global, and I'll cover where we stand with FedRAMP, where we stand with other US government certifications in just another part of this conversation. You also have access to tools like Azure Security Center. This is one of the tools that I was talking about a moment ago. Security Center can look at your applications, look at where there might be vulnerabilities, where there might be things you need to change or modify. Are we seeing things like brute force attacks? Are we seeing things go on with our applications? How do we remediate those? And it'll actually give you suggestions and recommendations of things that you need to do to remediate that. We actually publish best practice guides for leveraging our cloud environment, and that might be something that everyone wants to take a look at. Making sure that all the security controls are there is one thing, but leveraging the cloud, as I think you know, is a shared responsibility model. And the further up the stack that we move from IaaS to PaaS to SaaS environment, that model moves over as to what Microsoft is responsible for and what you're responsible for. So we need to make sure that we have a very clear understanding in each one of those environments of who's responsible for what, so that we leverage those controls appropriately. But Security Center is just one of the tools that allows us to do this, gives you a complete view of all of your services. We'll show you from an activity perspective who's doing what, where you might need to make patches, changes, modifications, add security controls that might be available to you in Azure. We also wanted to make sure that we mentioned from a security perspective, all your data is encrypted at rest, all your data is encrypted in flight, and you have a couple of different choices. You can use Microsoft managed keys, or you can bring your own keys to this environment, so you have the option to do either or. Your data is your data. Not only do we not have access to it, we don't really want access to it. So we want to make sure that you have complete trust and privacy in this platform. We're going to walk you through it in just a little bit, where you can find a lot of documents around how do we manage that security environment, how do you know what you're responsible for, how do you know what we're responsible for. We're very open and transparent about that, and we'll show you where you can find all of that documentation. All right, and Jim's going to do us a quick demo.
Yep. Okay. Can you get sound check? Can you guys hear me in the back? audio-wise? Awesome. Okay, cool. So let me switch over to my browser here. So what we're going to do here is kind of give you a fairly broad overview of the different things that you can do with the Azure portal and what's available in Azure from a services perspective. So consider this kind of a guided tour. So I'm going to go ahead and log in here to the portal. So when I go here, I'm going to be going to our URL for the government portal is portal.azure.us. If any of you are familiar with using the commercial environment, which is the .com, they are two distinct destinations on the web. And then I'm authenticating here using a specific cloud account that we have set up, and this is for my demo purposes. But one of the key advantages of Azure and leveraging the Azure Active Directory that comes along with it is that you can tie in your identity system with this login. So I have the capability of using an internal account to actually perform that authentication, but with a federated account, I can make that authentication actually happen back on premises. And with the government environment, a key advantage is that you can even tie in your PIV authentication if that's a requirement to address. So I'm just going to log in with fairly basic structure, no multi-factor fanciness, but I could actually include some kind of an MFA component so that I could get a push notification on my iPhone or even on my Apple Watch, right? That says, hey, we need a second factor, so I can either hit my authentication app and get my fingerprint, or just press an approve button on my watch.
We're not even Android fans out either.
And Android, that's right. All right, so let me get rid of my my LastPass bar there. Okay, so this is the dashboard. When you go into the Azure government environment, this is where you're going to land. The first time you go in, you're going to have a very generic dashboard with some basic features. I've customized mine to do the kind of things that I like to do from a demo perspective. But the dashboard is a great place to go from a visual perspective when you want to kind of keep an eye on what's happening in the things that concern you with Azure. The dashboard is very flexible. You can even create multiple dashboards. So if I wanted to have a dashboard that's specific to a project that I'm working on, a particular workload, I could create that and define it with the particular resources that I'm managing, whether it's IaaS or PaaS types of resources. And then I could actually share that out. So if I wanted to actually give this to the rest of my team so that they have the same environment in which to operate, the dashboard can be shared across your team very easily. And it's very much a drag and drop kind of perspective, right? I can pull tiles out of the gallery over here and bring them into a particular view, and I can have whatever kind of custom experience that I want to have. It's very straightforward, and so and this is what you get. So I'm going to go back to my dashboard, however, the one that I like to use. So I'm actually going to jump a little bit here because I have part of the demo. I'm going to be doing something from a script perspective, and it's going to take a little bit of time. So, but before I switch over, everything that we're seeing here is a very visual environment, right? Like Kent was saying before, it's a very click-through. You can see all the different component parts that go into deploying a particular solution. But everything that you see here that I can click through and do, I can do at a script level. I can create a project in Visual Studio if I wanted to, or whatever other development environment I want to use, and constitute an environment and just deploy it pretty much at the click of a button. So I'm going to go over to my command line, and I have, as we're very familiar here at CMS, we have the three-zone architecture that we adhere to as a standard. What I've done here, we'll go into the source resource group for this in a moment. But what I did, I took a resource group that is reflecting a three-zone environment, and I distilled it into a template. And then I took that template, and I have a bunch of values that go along that feed into that template. And so what I'm going to do here, I'm actually going to deploy a three-zone architecture environment with 3 virtual networks, a set of Linux front-end servers, a set of mid-tier Linux servers, and a couple SQL servers on the back end. So what my script does, the first part of the script goes out and authenticates. The same action that I did at the portal, I'm doing here from my script. So I'm going to do this again. And hopefully I don't typo.
You're a much better typist than I am.
I Okay, I'm authenticated and the script is executing. As you can see here, it's pulled my information here about, it's connected to the US government subscription and environment, and it's going to go ahead and start loading the modules that it needs to reference from a code perspective, and now it's going to actually start creating the resource group and all the components of the resources in IaaS that this template defines. So we're going to let that bake. So let's go back to the dashboard here real quick while that's moving along. So when we look at the actual, I guess, topology of the dashboard, we have our link up here at the top left corner. This is kind of your home button, right? Wherever you are, anywhere within the portal environment, you click that button, you're going to come back to your dashboard. Along the left-hand blade here, we have our feature requests, our services. So this is where you have all of the different resources that you can modify or control or manipulate. And this is very much a custom-defined list. So when you go down to the bottom here and it says more services, this list actually shows everything. What I have on that left-hand blade is essentially my custom pick list for the things that I tend to go to most. But again, this is one of those customizable features of the Azure portal. You can pretty much do whatever you need to. And so, for example, if I wanted to be working on, let's say, I'll say site recovery. So I'm going to use the recovery services vaults. I'm going to click that as a favorite, and now it appears over in the left-hand favorites group. So now other things that we're going to talk about here, I wanted to show a couple of easy navigation pieces. As you can imagine, we have some customers that have very extremely large and complicated deployments in Azure. So that can lead to hundreds, if not thousands, of resources, everything from the virtual machine to the virtual network to everything that goes along with that. If you want to have a fairly quick and easy way of actually finding something, we have a search bar. So if you have a particular thing that you want to look at, you can do a quick test here and you can find it. So I'm going to actually do a 3-zone demo. Search, and so I'm going to do that. As you saw, it had an IntelliSense component to it, so it was able to index and look through the index to find out what was there, so I could start helping me fill that out. And as you can see, it came here. For me, it came to the 3-zone demo resource group. A resource group in Azure is essentially a logical grouping of, well, resources, right, as the name implies, but more than just kind of a grouping together from a management perspective, it also acts as a virtual security boundary. So one common pattern that we see for Azure implementations is using a resource group to control access into particular resources for a particular workload. So within Azure, we have the concept of role-based access control. And when I have that, I have some built-in roles within Azure that allow me to actually do things, whether it's start up a virtual machine or use a SQL PaaS environment. You can use those role-based access control roles to tie into an Active Directory group, an Azure Active Directory group, and then control access into that. So if I'm working on one particular workload and Kent's working on another, unless we're in the same groups, the same role groups, we can't see each other's work. So when I would log into the portal, I would only see my resource group, where Kent would only see his. Right? And all that can be managed as part of an overall Active Directory identity management strategy.
It's also great when a project is over or it moves or
Yep.
it migrates. It's easy to shut down a whole resource group and know that you're getting all the components and not leaving something in the cloud that is costing you money behind.
Exactly. Oh, it's actually, and while we're in the 3-zone resource group here, I'll just show this. I'll give you a little bit of a description of what I did here. So I'm going to group all these by type. And as you can see here, we have several different kinds of resources within Azure. I've created, I guess we'll go from the bottom up here, or switch it around here. So virtual machines. So when I created this a couple of weeks ago, I had several, I think it's 9 or 10 front-end machines. They're basic Linux Red Hat servers. These actually might be Ubuntu machines. But same thing with the 5 app servers in the middle. Each of these go into a specific virtual network. So I have an app VNet, a data layer VNet, and then a presentation layer VNet. If I drill down into these, you see what resources are associated. So I'm going to say connected devices. And here in my presentation layer, I can see that the network interfaces for all of the front-end machines are connected up. So we also have some other networking components tying everything together. We have virtual network gateways so that the different VNets can talk to each other, as well as the connections that define what those look like. We have virtual hard drives for all of the different servers. Now, remember, we have that script that's running in the background here. In order to get that information, again, I created this environment maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Everything that you do in Azure has a templated descriptive process behind it. So for everything that you do, you have this automation script control for everything that you have access to in Azure. When you click on this link, you see the JSON definition of what that environment looks like. So this is my 3-zone environment, and this particular template took that construct and essentially generalized it. So this template that we see here has all those different components, all the front-end machines, all the back-end machines, the virtual networks, et cetera, and created a JSON file representing it. It also creates a separate parameters file. So this essentially takes the exact values of what the servers are named and things like that, and gives you a file in which to create your own environment. So you use the parameters file here to create the new name. So if I want a different series of names for my front-end servers, this is where I define that. But I guess what really ties us together is that you have your template and parameters file, but you also have the actual scripts to run these and deploy the environments. So that process, that script that I ran a few minutes ago that I kicked off, was nothing more than me taking this information here, extracting it. I had to do a little bit of massaging of some of the things, but it was maybe one line of script had to be changed. And I just ran this PowerShell script. It was that straightforward. And if you're not a PowerShell guy, that's fine, or gal, that's fine. We also give you the script to do it in Linux from a CLI perspective, as well as .NET. So if you want to have a .NET project where you're actually really doing infrastructure as code, just import this, and you have your project where you can manage your infrastructure from your Visual Studio environment. Not only that, but you can check in and check out your configuration information of the script, but also of the definition of that template. So if somebody makes a change into that template, you can see, oh, okay, Kent went in here and added a virtual machine 2 days ago, right, if you're tracking that information. So we're really getting towards that destination of infrastructure as code and leveraging the DevOps cycle for your cloud environment. Okay, so let me go back. A couple other things. I meant to talk about the subscriptions before I went into the resource groups, but subscriptions are your resource boundary from a large scale. It's kind of a billing boundary as well as a large scale resource boundary. So in any given subscription, you are allocated X number of CPU cores and X numbers of terabytes of storage, for example. So you have these boundaries that are defining what you can do and what you can't do. And typically, in a lot of cases, we see these defined for specific work groups. So you can have a subscription that has a dev test resource group, a QA resource group, and then a production. We see all different kinds of variations on it. At the end of the day, it's really about who's going to be organizing it and paying for that.
Just taking that up just a little bit higher level, describe the concept of subscription as it pertains to the CMS now.
Absolutely. So Blake's comment was to describe how the subscriptions relate to CMS. So one of the things that we've defined in working with the IUSG team is kind of a hierarchy of subscription management for the enrollment. So at the very top level, when you have Azure, you have an enrollment with Microsoft for Azure. And then from there, we can break it down so that we have individual constituent departments that are essentially a billing organizer. So for example, if OIT has their own department, everything from there can kind of flow into it. So it's not going to see, it won't necessarily see the billing or the consumption information from another department. And then from there, from the department, we can break it down into more specific accounts. And with regards to how we're breaking it down here, we're breaking it down from the perspective of the different systems integrators. So within a particular department, a systems integrator who is managing a particular workload would have their own account, and that account would then control one-to-many subscriptions and handle things at that level, right? So thank you, Blake. Good point. So let's look at some other things here. So virtual machines are what you would expect, from your typical cloud providers, right? It's fairly straightforward. Virtual machine scale sets. This is a nice feature that's fairly new to the Azure government environment. But what this allows you to do, this is a feature that allows you to provision VMs from either a built-in marketplace image that we have available, or you can even bring your own image if you like as well, and create a dynamically scaling environment for VM hosting. Typically, these kind of environments sit on the open internet, so they'll have some kind of a public IP address it's facing, so you'd have to make sure that gets secured in some manner, because these are typically for systems where you have public access hitting it, and you need to have that dynamic scale out and scale back capability. But we have essentially defined all that information here, and I'm not going to go into the details of this one too much, but you can define your instance count, your size, how many machines that you want to have running, but then what you want your scaling solution to actually look like. So if I was to go down and start configuring this, I could define the minimum and maximum number of VMs to have in this environment, as well as what the thresholds are going to be for scaling out or scaling back. So if I have 5 servers and they're starting to hit 70% CPU utilization, that will be the trigger to start expanding that resource pool without having to notify anybody to click a button, right? It's an automatic VM auto scale. And the same thing for scaling back. Once the usage actually starts to slow down, I can have a similar trigger to say, okay, start decommissioning servers as usage starts to shrink. Okay, so let me go ahead and talk through the marketplace. So we talked a little bit about this over the course of the morning. We have in Azure the concept of the marketplace, and this is where you can start accessing all of those interesting tools and things like that Kent was mentioning at the beginning of the talk. Obviously, we have your traditional virtual machines that are running Windows already. That's kind of bread and butter. But like we're saying, Linux is probably one of our most used workloads in Azure right now, both in Azure Government and in Azure Commercial. So this is where you would access all that. And this is kind of the generic list here, and this isn't very interesting. But if we go into the compute and we start breaking it down to the types of resources that you can deploy. So from an IaaS perspective, we have your bread and butter compute, networking, storage, things that you need to know about. But then we also start getting into the platform as a service capabilities.
Click see all.
Yep. You're ahead of me.
Sorry. I'll get back in my box.
That's right. So as you can see here, we have a lot of different options for you to choose from. We have Windows servers, so you can buy Windows servers that are just basic Windows with nothing on them, or you can actually buy them with things like SQL or BizTalk already pre-installed, and you configure that as part of the installation process. But of course, we have Red Hat Enterprise Linux. That's probably the big one that everybody likes to use to build on top of. But we also have other third-party items here as well. So Barracuda, for example. So because this is a web application firewall, this is in the compute section here. But we also have a lot of other Barracuda or items in the networking section here as well. So if you want to actually put other firewalls in your implementation, we have all these available. We also have bring your own license capabilities, other licensing options that just bill you as part of the service. So if you were to buy a SQL Server instance within Azure, the licensing cost for SQL is kind of baked into that.
So something I will say about that, as while we've certainly embraced the open source community, there's something to consider on applications where you're running SQL or applications where you're running Windows about the total cost of ownership of that and the licensing capability that Microsoft offers you. To be able to deliver SQL straight as a PaaS service is going to save you a fair amount of money. To be able to do bring your own license as well for Windows has the opportunity for those servers to save you a substantial amount. So there are licensing considerations there to think about as you develop your applications and determine where to put them.
Yep, and we'll talk about some of the cost estimation towards the end of the talk here. But a couple other things here, as you can see, we have you see F5 appliances, Citrix appliances. There's quite a wide variety of things to choose from, and this is always growing. So we are always seeing vendors bringing in items into our marketplace all the time. And so if you're, especially if you're used to working in Azure Commercial and you might see something over there that's not in Azure Government, come talk to us. We might be able to help things along. Okay, I'll talk to networking a little bit. So we'll go into some of the, I guess, the Rosetta Stone differences between AWS and Azure here in a little bit. But as we have the networking options, so we have ExpressRoute, which is our direct, our extremely fast connection directly into your data center to the Microsoft Cloud service that we offer, which is in place here at CMS, so that is actually up and running. But we have everything else that you can think of here as well: load balancers, application gateways, virtual networks, the whole 9 yards. For storage, we have a few different storage options. From the basic level, we have storage accounts, which are kind of just these collection areas for data, whether it's blob data or table data. We also have different ways of actually storing that information. So if you wanted to have what we call locally redundant storage, which is the default. So when you set up a storage account, you have 3 different copies of the data that are already automatically propagated in the particular region that you're within. But we also have the geo-replicated storage, which is a little bit more, but it replicates that to one of the other partner data centers and has 3 copies in that data center there as well. But we also have 2 different tiers of storage. We have standard and we have what we call premium storage, which is solid state drive based. Typically it's more expensive. That's the kind of thing that you want to take a look at if you're going to be running a high intensive workload database, for example. We see that a lot. Let's see here. Web and mobile, so we'll go into the platform as a service capabilities here a little bit. So like we were talking about before, we have the capabilities of having web apps, which are essentially the scenario where you don't have to worry about the underlying virtual machine. So the only thing that you're worried about in the platform as a service scenario is making sure that your system is configured from for example, for a SQL PaaS environment, that the server is sized appropriately, but you don't actually have to manage that virtual machine. You don't have to worry about patching, anything like that. It's just really, you're just accelerating that DevOps cycle so that you can push your system updates or your app updates in a rapid way, and you're not worrying about that lower level of the infrastructure. So same thing with the databases here. So this is what we were talking about earlier. We have the SQL database in the blue here is the SQL PaaS offering. If you're going to click on this, you would configure the size of the database, whether or not you're replicating to a different geographic location, what the storage medium is, things like that, but you don't have to worry about the VM itself. And then one thing before I move off of the marketplace here, I am going to point out we do have blockchain in Azure Government now. I don't know, when did this come into Azure?
That was announced
a couple weeks ago?
2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so if anybody's looking into blockchain, we actually have the Ethereum consortiums that you can install. They're basically Linux machines, and then you have to install whatever it is that you're looking to do from a data mining perspective, but it's here if you want to start looking at it.
So just something very quickly on that. Microsoft's blockchain approach is really a bring your own ledger environment. If you want to use Ethereum, great. If you want to use other ledgers, perfect. We've really done a lot around the smart contract environment with enterprise smart contracts to figure out how do we make your application, I would say, enterprise ready, if you will. How do we control what data goes on the chain and limit, be able to limit that data to what it really needs to be, and be able to help you in that environment. So it's really a thing of, we want to give you a platform to bring your own ledger and bring your application to be able to leverage blockchain. We have pilot opportunities as well. It's a pretty amazing thing to be able to say I can stand up a blockchain environment in about 30 minutes using a service. It's just mind-boggling to those of you that have maybe done that on premise in a lab or a pilot environment.
Awesome. So let me see here. I'm going to go back to my home page, and let's see if. Yep. Okay. So so just to go back and check on the oven, the script is finished executing, and so as you can see here, this is everything that the template defined. Right. The only thing I didn't put as part of this particular demo was the connection of a VPN gateway between the virtual networks, just because those take a while to actually spin up. They're basically routers, so that would have made this demo way too long. But if I go into my resource groups, So there's 3-zone demo. This is what we were looking at before when I showed you that template. 3-zone demo live is what we just created. And so as you can see here, this is an entire environment, right? It's about 15, 16 servers, 3 virtual networks, and everything that goes along with that, minus the virtual network VPN connections. So this shows you how in less than 20 minutes I was able to instantiate an entire environment from nothing. The only thing that would have to happen now is that you just create those virtual network connections from the 3-zone perspective, so that all the other layers in the CMS environment could connect into the specific virtual networks that we have here. But let's go ahead and actually talk about or walk through the process of standing up a virtual machine by itself. I'm going to go ahead and stand up a Red Hat box here. All right. Okay, so I'm going to call it Red Hat. So I'm going to give my VM a name. It's CMS Demo Red Hat Enterprise Linux. This is where I'd pick my hard drive type. So this is either solid state or typical hard drive. I'm trying to keep this cheap from a cost perspective, so I'm going to use the hard drive. Local name, you can't use anything like admin or administrator or anything like that. So. And then for so I'm going to just say local admin. And then for for a Linux machine, this is why I'm really liking Linux a lot. And if you told me I'd be saying that 5 years ago on a stage, I would have thought you were crazy. But you can use a public key pair, public-private key pair to actually define your login passcode there. So I'm going to go ahead and use the one that I like using a lot. Oops, that's not the right one. Go ahead and paste that into the key there, and I'm going to create and if you have multiple subscriptions here, you could pick which subscription that you wanted to have that deploying to. So I only have the one. And then for resource groups, you can create something new, or you can choose something existing. I'm going to go ahead and create a new one, and then I get to pick which Azure government region that I want to deploy to. I like going to Texas. Yeah, that's next.
Yes.
That'll be next. Next, you go into the size. So at this point, I can pick from any number of virtual machine sizes. So when you go into here and you go to view all, you're going to see a humongous list of different types of virtual machines. The way we structure the VM types that you can purchase, they're grouped together by by size, so that the CPU and RAM are typically in these packages, right? So we have the DS3 V2 has 4 CPUs and 14 gigabytes of RAM. You can't change the individual components there. But you can actually change the VM size of what you're running on, more or less on the fly. So as you can see here, there's a number of different features that you'd want to analyze based on what your requirements are for the application. Typically the larger DS series are more for database type access because they support SSDs, multiple data drives, things like that.
Jim?
Yep.
If I may, this type of thing in Dev Test Labs is exactly what you can control and restrict. So if you wanted to say in Dev Test Labs, I only want to allow people to use mechanical drives and not solid state. I only want to allow them to use certain server types or use certain capabilities. That's the type of thing in Dev Test Labs you can actually set quotas on as well, so that as you turn this on really to help drive innovation and allow people to create applications faster and do that mode faster, we don't wind up with a bill we're not expecting at the end of the month that's out of line.
Yep. Yeah, so for this, as you can see, we have a lot of different size variations to pick from. I'm going to go into the A series, which are typically our shared CPU type of resources, because I'm cheap. And I don't want to be yelled at by my boss. Remind me to tell you about the time where I left an HD Insight cluster running for a week.
Nice. On your Amex, no doubt.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a long series of emails back and forth. Anyway, so yeah. To the point of making sure you don't leave things running. So once you determine your size and you move forward from there, you can start getting into the more esoteric aspects of the VM. So we have something called the availability sets. An availability set in Azure is something that for an infrastructure as a service deployment, this is what, if you deploy it properly across an availability set, you will actually get the 99.95% SLA, if I'm not mistaken. So in order to get a specific SLA from an IaaS perspective, certain things need to be architected a certain way. The availability set essentially takes your components of the VMs that are in that set and distributes them to different locations within the data center, so that should something happen, your entire system isn't wiped out. Right? So I'm going to go, this is just for a quick demo, so I'm not going to worry about that. For storage, we have the capability of using managed disks or not managed disks. Managed disks are a new format or a new feature in Azure Government only within the last few months. But we highly recommend using them. They're very efficient. They allow almost very quick dynamic switching if you needed to switch into a premium drive or back to a hard disk drive, whatever your needs are. But they also allow you to do very efficient snapshotting as well. So we highly recommend them for a lot of reasons. So then when you're going down here, you go through and you pick your virtual network. I have an existing, actually this is the one I'm going to use. So I'm going to pick my cloud demo VNet that I have here. Your subnet is going to pick an internally routable subnet. So this is something that's kind of an internal system. It's not something that you have exposed typically. But what you could do is if you needed to NAT something or something like that from a VPN perspective, you could access it through there. But we also have, of course, the public IP address. So what the public IP address allows you to do is have an external publicly available endpoint on the internet. Obviously, this has security implications to it, so you want to make sure that you're not doing this most of the time, unless you have a specific tick use case 0 type of situation where it is for a publicly accessible, for market information or whatever it is that's going to be consumed by the public that doesn't need authentication, things like that. Basically, what I'm saying is be very careful with public IP addresses. In fact, in other environments where we've been working with the customers in the government space, we've actually had to create custom RBAC roles that turn this off for your typical IT worker.
And again, a lot of that is not just a security thing, it's a tick compliance thing.
Exactly.
You have the option to extend your tick boundary to include our network across your express route connection. So that traffic from you to our cloud does not have to go through a tick environment. That's part of the TIC 2.0 supported frameworks. It's right there in the documentation. And that's what Jim is talking about, that we can support in this environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we have network security groups. What a network security group is a layer 3 firewall, basically, and you can use this to configure what data can go in from what port and from what destination, and outbound as well. I'm just going to use one of the ones that's already in here. Just go from there. Extensions are a great thing to have at the enterprise level, because what you can use extensions for are to do post-installation actions from a particular VM. So if you want to have a particular build where, there's one path forward where you can have a particular gold image that's completely defined that has every package that you'd want installed on it. But a more dynamic way of doing something might be creating a virtual machine like we're doing here, and then having it pull several extensions out that install, big fix and whatever else you want to actually put on a particular build that creates that gold system, right, based on whatever the definition is. And then we have monitoring capabilities as well. So for diagnostics, if you have if you want to track any particular issues going on from a boot perspective, both from a startup perspective and an ongoing long-running logging perspective, we can take this data and send it out to a storage account. Nice thing there is that you can take that storage account and have it be pulled in by something like Splunk, for example, if you want to get all that information. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and deploy. And then while that's going on, so as you can see here, these are some old demos that I have. I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of these guys on my dashboard. But this is this far tile here. This is the deployment that we have running right now. And while that's going on, I'm also going to point out the Azure automation. So in Azure Government, talking about the whole concept of making sure that you're not letting things run overnight or too long, or if you have a dev environment, things like that. If you don't have a dev environment and you want to make sure things are structured and turned on and off at certain points in time, the Azure automation is the way that you would do this, right? So essentially it is if you guys are familiar with doing schedule tasks in Windows, right? This is essentially the same thing, but at the cloud scale. So what you can do with this is you have a security principal that's tied into Azure Active Directory, and then you can pull in runbooks to actually do specific tasks. And these can be scripted through PowerShell and then just uploaded into here, or they can be actually graphically represented and assembled on the Azure portal. I'm not going to actually go through that, but for this particular example, one of the things that I do for that 3-zone resource group that we were talking about, I have an automation run book that's right in here, and this goes, and every night at 8 o'clock, it turns everything off. And then in the morning at 8 or 9 o'clock, it starts turning everything back on again. So that way I don't have to worry about it. I'm not overburning my VMs because I'm sitting there asleep, and they're just kind of sitting there, turning the meter, which I don't want. I want to be able to save my budget. So I have this script here that goes through it and manages that. So let's see how this is going here. All right, that's still deploying. And let's see. One other thing that we want to talk about before we go into the, or take a look at the machine that we created. We want to talk about SQL databases here. Oh, there it is. So this is the SQL as a service, like we were talking about before. Essentially, it is just the actual SQL database that's out there. You have to create a security principal in Azure Active Directory for this to work effectively, but once it's up there, you just connect to it like you would any other SQL database. In fact, you use your SQL tools to connect out to this cloud instance, just like you would any other on-prem database. And then you track everything or define everything here with regards to how you configure your SQL environment, right? Geo-replication. I can tell it which data center to actually replicate to within the Azure environment. There's encryption that you can enable on the database. It's like having your own SQL in the cloud that you're not having to worry about managing. Okay, so let's take a look at the virtual machine that we created real quick. And this is the one that we CMS demo Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Oops, let me close that. So again, I created this using my public-private key pair here. So I'm going to go, just to make sure that this is actually running, I'm going to go here, I'm going to pull up PuTTY, and I'm going to use that IP address that it created here for me. And I'm just going to connect in. Oh, it's still spinning up. All right, we'll check that out later. Because I know we're running long on the demo here, so I want to switch it over back to you. So, but yeah, so again, this whole instantiation of this Red Hat machine took about 5 minutes, I think, and you're up and running. So with that, I'm going to finish up the demo because we covered quite a bit of stuff here. Sure. And then I will switch over to Kent here. Okay. All right, let's talk about Azure Government.
Just sitting here thinking exactly how long has PuTTY been around at this point. We're still using it. So real quickly, and I think this is being recorded, so if you want to see that demo, and maybe as you wrap up, you could talk about how does everyone have access to that portal so that they can leverage it so that you can see these things. Where all this becomes real is when you, of course, get time to sit down and click through it and play with these tools yourself. Just really quickly, as was mentioned, if you want to go ahead and build that out, this is the Microsoft Azure Government Enclave. This is a separate investment for Microsoft. It is U.S. federal government and our government SIs and those applications that are being created specifically for government only. We have multiple existing regions. You can choose, as you saw in the demo, where you want your data to sit in the data centers that are closest to you. It's a fully CONUS environment operated by background cleared individuals. So it's a separate investment specifically for this that follows the NIST definition of what a community cloud actually is, meaning that we control access to who can become a part of this cloud, and I'll cover that in just a moment. But it's a major investment. It's the largest U.S. government cloud investment in this country in terms of specific different locations just for government that are at least 500 miles apart in all options so that we can fully support disaster recovery scenarios and replicate your data to multiple locations. Go ahead to the next slide there. ExpressRoute, as was mentioned earlier, ExpressRoute gives you an opportunity to connect to our cloud either with direct connections through something like an Equinix or by extending frame relay networks. I believe you said this is an Equinix.
Yes.
It's an Equinix connection that we have here. So you have the option to be able to leverage ExpressRoute, extend that. If you want, is the decision here to extend the boundary to the cloud? So that gives you the option to create applications that don't necessarily have to go through the TIC environment as long as we're closing off that back door to the internet connection, which Jim was showing is an option, and you have the capability to leave that off if you would like. So again, multiple network connections that we have for ExpressRoute, and that decision's already been made here. From a certifications perspective, it is the broadest, most decorated cloud, if you will, in terms of government certifications that we have. I know this is kind of a marketing braggadocious style slide. It's really just something to be able to say we're making a huge investment in the federal government. If we look at FedRAMP or any of the global comparisons for these, each one of these is really just which ISO controls is this government agency interested in, or this government entity interested in. And because we're doing this for global governments, we're actually going well beyond what you see in FedRAMP only, because we're doing this globally, really across the board. We do have a huge investment that we'll talk about as well for how can we help you get additional FedRAMP services. If there are things that you're interested that are not within scope for us at the moment, let us know. We have a dedicated team, and it's their job to, based on demand, make sure that we bring those within FedRAMP scope. So please bring those to Blake's attention or to Jim's attention, and we have literally a weekly call to help prioritize those for you to make sure that we're delivering the services that you need. We have I don't know if it would interest you, but we have CJIS certifications with, I think, 32, 34 different states at the moment for the Criminal Justice Information Network. We offer ITAR services. We offer FIPS compliance. We will sign HIPAA BPAs. This is what we do, right? So we are making sure that we deliver the types of services, whether it's things you see here, whether it's IRS 1075, whatever that compliance happens to be that you need. Please let us know. This is a huge investment for us. We want to make sure that we bring it to your needs. This list is published. As for what are the FedRAMP services, there is a public website we can go to and see what those services actually are, what's planned to come online next. And so if you have any question, there's a dynamic link that we can make sure that we get to you so that you can see are the services that I'm considering building my application on already within FedRAMP scope. If not, do I want to get exceptions for that? When can Microsoft deliver that to me? What capabilities do I have? Maybe even to do something hybrid. So we can walk through these with you at any time and let you know what this looks like. So again, this is the largest list of PAS and IaaS services available from any vendor today under FedRAMP scope, and we continue to make a huge investment on this moving forward. So we're absolutely committed. Please let us know how we can help you. I want to talk about something kind of unique that Microsoft has done called Azure Blueprint. Azure Blueprint is really, as we look at what does it take to adopt cloud, what are the compliance steps that you need to adopt cloud, what are the best practices, we have literally created blueprints specifically for that, and we have services around that to help you be able to adopt applications in the cloud or put applications in the cloud. We also did things like when the cyber sprint came down last year and it said, make sure that you are aligned within the NIST cybersecurity framework. We actually published a blueprint specifically to the NIST cybersecurity framework that said, here's all the controls in the NIST CSF. Here's all the tools and services that Microsoft uses to make you compliant with that, and here's the service that you would be interested in to be compliant with that, and whether or not that service is your responsibility or your cloud provider's responsibility. So we help you through all of those different style things. Jim, will you just Alt-Tab over to the screen just for a second? If he were to go to aka.ms/Azure Blueprint, you would actually see, I'm just going to go here just for a second, and just because some people have eyes like mine, I will pinch and zoom. There's a wide variety. My vision was really fine, right? And I went to the eye doctor, and she goes, oh, you're over 45. Yeah. Have a nice day. So I was like, oh, you went to doctor school for that. The blueprints actually give you step-by-step capabilities, really well documented as to how to adopt cloud, how to make sure that you're supporting compliance. You can see whether it's DoD Level 4, NIST SP 800. You can scroll down, if you will, to the FedRAMP blueprints under there. Whether it's FedRAMP control implementation metrics, whatever these things are, the full Azure SSP, there's how do we be compliant with certain healthcare codes. We have published these services out. We also actually have Azure Blueprint services where we can engage with you and help make sure that your application is going to be compliant. What are the steps you would need to go through, help accelerate your ATO process for a new application that you would need to be able to bring to market. This is a service that Microsoft offers. So again, wanted to make sure everybody knew this was available. Jim, will you zoom out for that whole page just for 1 second? Sorry. Zoom all the way up to the top, please. I want to talk just for 1 second about this portal, just so that everybody knows about it. There is something that is called the Microsoft Trust Portal. If you want to just jot that down very quickly, every security question that you would ever have about how do we detect things, how do we operate our cloud, what different types of encryption do we have at rest and in flight, what are your options for protecting your data, how do we look at things from a legal perspective, from a discovery perspective. Everything is there on that Trust Portal. I bet I answer 20 questions a week with links from the Trust Portal. So while I'm more than happy to answer those questions, I want everybody to know that this resource is there. I mean, transparency is huge to us. It's the only way that we're ultimately going to trust each other and that you're going to trust the cloud. And we know that's a real important part of removing the barriers for this adoption. So the Microsoft Trust Center answers a lot of those questions for you, the vast majority of those that you would ever have, quite honestly, as to when you look at adopting things in Azure. I think we've covered this really in another slide, but from an open source momentum perspective, I think you saw all those things in the marketplace. I do want to point out that everything that Jim was showing you inside of the marketplace, those are services delivered with our partners and with Microsoft that are really templates, PaaS style services, in some cases full SaaS services that you can take advantage of, but you also always have the option to stand up a VM, build that yourself if it's not there in the marketplace. So it's really your choice as to which route you want to go, especially in a dev test environment where you might want to try some unique things. You want to cover eligibility and onboarding?
Sure. I get a chance to stand up too.
Sure.
And I got my mic.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so cool. And we talked about this a little bit. Hopefully I'm still reading. Good. We talked about this a little bit when we were going through the slides prior and on the demo, but not everybody can use Azure Government. It's a public cloud, but only for government entities, right? There's a specific process that you have to meet in order to actually be able to use Azure Government. So obviously a government agency gets a chance to be able to leverage Azure Government for hosting, but also if you're an integrator and you're working actively with the government to be able to host something, you also can play in the sandbox, so to speak. And when we're doing that, it's federal government. It's also state and local in the U.S. So there's a very restricted amount of people that actually get to go in there.
That's really our alignment to the NIST definition of the government cloud.
Okay.
Or of a community cloud, sorry.
Yep. Okay, this slide, so George gave us some feedback a couple weeks ago when we had the first revision of this, and I thought this was great. I think the word was Rosetta Stone, I think, that we got back. And I think that's actually an apt description for this particular slide. So I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with AWS. And like we've been kind of talking and showing over the course of the morning here, there's a lot of similar features, right? But so in order to be able to start leveraging things in Azure, okay, how do you start making that connection with regards to what are some of the same features? Are you going straight to the link? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so we have this link actually is on that slide, and it's just further on this deck too. We also have released what I guess was 2 weeks ago. It was right before the GovCloud Summit.
The downloadable version?
Yeah, the download PDF version of this, and it is an extremely well done document. I highly encourage you to download this because it gives a great overview of not just what the different services are, but it tells you, obviously tells you what the comparison is on the AWS side, but it gives you also a very detailed description of what the different components are. So you can get some idea there of what we got. Yep. So, yeah, you go back real quick. But there are, what I did want to point out here is that where there are a lot of very similar services between the two platforms, there are a couple where we have services that are unique to Azure. Wait, go ahead.
So we'll point those out, and one of the things you'll see off that site is, in many cases, there are actually blog descriptions of how do we use this differently or where you might leverage this tool. So it's a fantastic resource.
Absolutely. One of the things we wanted to talk about as well is that we're not, even though we're here kind of presenting Azure for, kind of as a ribbon cutting ceremony, if you will, we've actually been working with CMS for quite a while in the very recent past. A few years ago, around the 2014 timeframe, CMS has actually started to use the Microsoft Cloud from the perspective of Office 365. So working with HHS OS, right? You participated in that email migration to the cloud, which I think completely finished like last year or the year before that, something like that. So CMS has been an active user of the Microsoft Cloud for a few years now. Then I guess a couple of years ago in 2015, we were working with the CGI team for their CAS system to introduce Store Simple. And what Store Simple is a network appliance. It's actually a physical appliance that you install on premises, and it has that three-tiered data architecture. So you have SSDs for the fast, hot storage that you'd want to access very rapidly. Another layer of standard hard drives for the slightly cooler data, and then anything else that's old, that's considered cold data, is actually sent into a storage account in Azure, right, for safekeeping. And so we worked with the team to actually incorporate that into their architecture and went through a very specific ATO process just for that one feature. Then about a year ago, we started working on our initial reference architecture that we started to deploy and started to kind of circulate and socialize with a lot of the community in the IOSG side. And then in this last year, we actually started making that a reality. So we created a shared services enclave, and a few initial workloads started being deployed in Azure from certain integrators. And then, of course, like we were saying, we had a couple of weeks ago, we finally received that ATO from a FedRAMP High perspective. So a couple of the other things about Azure security that we wanted to touch about. Kent did a great job talking about Azure security, some of the Azure security services that are built in, as well as the encryption. Again, which we do want to actually make sure is reiterated, right? So we support FIPS 140-2 level 2. We have AES 256 for pretty much everything. And of course, you have that great advantage that you can bring your own keys if you want to. If you want to let Azure run that, that's fine. But if you want to bring your own keys and manage that with the facilities that we have, you're absolutely able to do that. But a couple other things that I wanted to go into a little bit more detail with. And I mentioned this during the demo. With Azure Active Directory, you have the capability of making that as strict as you need it to be. So in the demo, you saw me just leverage a username and password. That's great. Okay, whatever. But if you want to make that a little bit more complicated, you can add multi-factor authentication into it, whether it's using a phone factor kind of system or using your smartphone. Or again, if you have a federated account with your on-premises Active Directory, then you can leverage your PIV authentication, which is for the government, I think it's a fantastic resource. Then from there, if you're really starting to leverage Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, then you can start implementing the roles and the role-based security within Azure so that you can very fine-tuned control. You have a very fine-tuned way of controlling access into any resources in Azure that you need to handle. You can use the out-of-the-box stuff if you want to, but in a lot of cases, especially in a lot of government enterprises, we find that there needs to be a little bit of fine-tuning with regards to how systems need to be accessed. And then, of course, Operations Management Suite. OMS it's a very broad product, and it has several different components to it. One of the primary pieces of OMS is the ability to leverage some security controls. So for example, there's a component within the security feature of OMS that allows you to do analytics based on some of the security graph information that gets collected by Microsoft as a whole. So as you're all probably aware, we get a lot of people using our things on the cloud. So we get to see a lot of data intelligence with regards to how things behave, whether it's a standard access or whether somebody's trying to do some kind of a malicious attempt to access in any systems. We collect a lot of this data, so we see these patterns. These patterns we can then apply to information that we collect based on the log information in your systems that you have in Azure. And so this can be a way to actually leverage some pattern detection and to give you a heads up of what might be happening.
So, just real quickly on that, I don't know if anyone in the room is working with the team that does Homeland Security CDM, continuous diagnostics and mitigation. We are undergoing a process at Microsoft to take the log analytics capabilities, the operations management suite. Actually, I think that the current list is 15 new products through the CDM approval process. I hope that paperwork will be completed and submitted this month. There's a window from DHS for the end of this month for new products. They have changed the exception process. We used to have to work through an SI, and an SI would help us do the testing and approval. And it was a little bit of a longer process to get the SIN so that you could leverage the money from DHS to be able to deploy that product and have it in an acceptable mode. We have a wide variety of tools that, quite honestly, are predominantly housed in Azure that gives us the option to fulfill your CDM security requirements. If you think about it, when CDM was written, I remember when the RFP or BPA first came out, it was predominantly for on-premises capabilities. It really didn't recognize cloud applications or cloud tools. Quite honestly, but it's a very different thing now that they're looking at. And so if you're interested in that, if you have concerns about that, contact Jim or Blake or I. We can tell you exactly where we are and where we stand in that.
Yep. And then one other thing is from a security perspective, from management, right? One of the other components about making sure your systems are secure are to make sure that they're continually updated. Right, so the configuration management aspect of OMS is another way to thing you can leverage. Say, okay, I have this pool of VMs that I'm running here. Several of them are not patched to the current spec, so it'll send you an alert and give you a kind of a dashboard view of what you need to fix. Right.
You good?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Okay, so some key differentiators here. So like we've been talking about, we talked a lot about FedRAMP. One of the commitments that we have to you as a government entity is that Azure Government will be focusing on the FedRAMP High accreditation for any of the services that come along with that. The commercial Azure won't have necessarily that level of commitment, right? There's a certain level of FedRAMP moderate accreditation that we have for Azure commercial, but it's really limited to primarily the infrastructure as a service components and a couple of the platform components. So if you have things on there, it's not out of the realm of possibility to get something, get an ATO for something like that. It's just going to be a lot more work, right, versus something that's in the Azure government environment. So we talked a little bit about this before, but we have 4 separate regions across the country. So if you need to have that geo-separated requirement of having information replicated to a different secure data center, we can support you there. Azure Active Directory that we talked about quite a bit is a huge feature that essentially is kind of the linchpin of security in Azure. So you can't really do anything without interacting in some way with Azure Active Directory. And Azure Site Recovery. So this is an OMS component that we haven't really talked about yet. But we find this is an extremely valuable tool and a powerful tool to enable you to start leveraging Azure. So ASR, when it was first conceived, was basically a kind of a DR tool, right? It allowed you to use Azure as either a holding area or a pass-through area for information that you wanted to replicate to another site. So if I had a Hyper-V environment in my data center and I wanted to replicate it out to a different location, I could use ASR to actually perform that and manage that. What we've been finding is that ASR is an incredibly useful migration tool. So a very common pattern that we see with ASR is that it gets implemented and you pick your environment, VMware, Hyper-V, whatever you need, and you replicate your environment, virtual network, virtual machines, etc. You change the IP addresses to accommodate the new environment and all that stuff, and you just migrate it into Azure. And then when you're ready to go, you can flip a switch, change a couple of DNS records, and now you're all of a sudden hosting your application in Azure. In fact, one of the workloads that we have in Azure now was migrated in using ASR. So it's a highly recommended tool.
It's a great way to fail over an app to see how it would run in
Exactly.
the cloud. Understand the networking ramifications, what your service infrastructure would look like to do that. And of course, as Jim showed, you can script it off or on so that once it's there, you're not actually running it. But we certainly have customers that have failed it over and said, hey, it works, we should keep it. And you can begin to decommission on-premise. One thing I want to mention is we also now have Azure Site Recovery from site to site.
That's right.
And so if you need to deliver something out of Azure Government on the West Coast for some reason, because it's closer to the customer that would be offering, we can do that, and we can actually fail over from site to site as you move applications. Maybe you developed it on an East Coast location, but it's primarily for a customer or an end user on the West Coast. You can actually do ASR from site to site between our own data centers.
Yeah, and then another thing too is that a great use of ASR, I think Kent touched on it a little bit, is that if you wanted to have a testing environment for this application, ASR is a perfect way of doing that. So you replicate your information or your environment into Azure from on-prem or from wherever the source is, and essentially you can isolate it and then do whatever type of load testing or whatever it is against.
It's the purest form of lift and shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then we talked about OMS a lot already, and then Azure Stack. We've only touched on Azure Stack a little bit, but Azure Stack it's an on-prem. If you're familiar with it, it's a device that you can bring in and connect into your on-premises data center. But the advantage there, it has the same exact API as the Azure that you would reach out to in the cloud. So if you want to have a similar kind of a way of managing a particular set of services, Azure Stack is a great way of doing it on-prem and then migrating it over, and just by essentially just changing an API call, an API endpoint call, to hit the actually cloud environment versus the Azure Stack environment.
The one final thing that I just mentioned on this slide, and I'm carefully watching the clock. I know some people are hungry. One other key differentiator to mention, and we talked about it very briefly, is license portability.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of licenses that you own on premises today that you could leverage in this environment. The capability to move Windows licenses, capability to leverage SQL in that environment, the capability to go straight paths with SQL. There's a lot of licensing and cost ramifications. There's also some things and some conversations that we can have with you if any of you are unfamiliar as to how cloud is really built. To think about it as you're architecting your applications, because what really happens when you develop a cloud application or when you build a cloud application is it's based on consumption, right? And so if data is leaving that network to go somewhere else, maybe I want to put my compute in one cloud and my analytics in another cloud, and I've got storage in another cloud, and I want to do workflow, and maybe I have a line of business application that runs in another cloud. What you've just created is a very, very expensive application, because that data is traversing multiple clouds to create that, and you're being charged for that data every time it traverses that cloud. So just consider your existing resources, your existing assets, the capabilities, what your overall application is trying to do. And I think there's also some real differentiators there, because we can offer an entire environment that is not only hybrid, but offers your workflow tools in 365, your collaboration tools in 365, as well as your single express route connection back to CMS.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we've done here at CMS already. So one of the things that we spent a lot of time over this spring and summer to establish was what we're calling the Shared Services Enclave. The concept behind shared services is that you have a cloud-based environment that has some commonly used systems that you would leverage. So Splunk for data collection, Nessus for scanning, things like that, that are already established that you don't have to actually worry about including in your own environment, right? So it's just, you just leverage what's there and you just focus on your application, right? So that was the whole piece for that. And let's see, thank you. Now DevOps, so I did want to touch on DevOps. Like we were talking about in the demo, there's incredible power to being able to have your infrastructure as code and really start to realize that continual integration, continual development and deployment pattern that you have there with, and not just at the pure PaaS level where you can publish your application directly into a web app, but even treat your infrastructure as versioned code, if you will, right? And then again, so letting your team being able to actually directly connect to it is a key advantage. And this is one of the things that we wanted to bring with Azure was the capability of once you set up your environment and you're onboarded with regards to access, at that point, the environment is yours. And as long as you're consistent and I guess very intentional with regards to how you're budgeting and what you're planning on implementing in the environment, it's your environment, right? The idea is to give you the power to be able to quickly leverage the services that you need to actually access and implement. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Rickson.
Sitting too long.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Oh, whoa, let me hold it down here. Sorry. Robert Rickson, IUSG, part of the cloud services team. I want to thank everybody at Microsoft for this. It's a great thing. We've got our ATO finally. It's been a long time coming. Talk about onboarding. When we're talking onboarding, we are lucky at CMS to have a dedicated team of Microsoft technicians for us. So if you want to talk onboarding, we can do this before you are even ready to go. Talk infrastructure, we can talk how do you want to do your architecture layout. It's not going to be a true lift and shift. If you're a brand new person, you want to do it, we can have that conversation in the beginning. We can do it if you want to lift and shift. We can talk about how to re-architect before you come over. We have the entire team here that at your beck and call, we can set up a meeting, we can do all of that stuff. But once you're actually ready to do the onboarding, we're a little bit different than you're normally used to with the government. We have it set up for the MAG, Microsoft Azure Government, where we're going to take your DevOps team is going to go directly to Dell and get their conversation started and get the contract with Dell. So instead of us having to go the long route where we do the IGCE, we do the ROM, back and forth in that long contract process, your DevOps team will actually get the hosting contract from Dell, and from there, they'll bill you as the business owner, and they'll get on a lot quicker. Time-wise, it's usually going to be as quick as you and your DevOps team want to go. I mean, we can get it in a couple of days. We can get you up and running, get your subscription, get you into MAG. If it's one of those, you have a couple of questions, we need to set up meetings, it can take a couple of weeks or a couple of days. What's good about that for a lot of the DevOps teams, once they're in with Dell, they have their contract with Dell, they're in with Dell. If you bring on another project, either if it's your same business owner who has another application, or now you're in, you want to go ahead and host another one, you don't have to go back through Dell for that whole thing. You're already in, you go to the business owner, you're getting everybody back on. So it speeds up the contracting process immensely. I mean, you can see there with cost of renting, MAG orientation meetings, basically we have everyone that we can take as much time as we need to get you guys caught up. Next slide would probably be the best one, if we can do it up.
You're probably talking to me for a lot of these too.
Exactly.
Both me and Ted.
Because we've got Jim here and we've got Ted Davis, who's actually on site with us all the time. He's another digital architect. We're glad to sit down with you, even if you're just thinking about the cloud in general. We get a lot of meetings. It's going to be a business owner. Which cloud do I want to go? Do I want to go AWS? Do I want to go Azure? Do I want to do it on site? And we're glad to sit down with you and talk to you the benefits of the cloud. How can we architect you better from the start? Or if you want to lift and shift, what's better? Do we want to architect you now before you go in? So we can do it long term. We have some that are wanting to go in 2019, and we've got some that I need to be out in 6 months. What can we do? So the time limit is up to you. The earlier you reach out to us, the better we can try and get you re-architected before you go in. But we can always re-architect once you get into Azure. But again, it's one of those, we're here at your beck and call. We've got our dedicated team, which is really great. Again, we have the Azure Site Recovery Tool, which is going to be a really good thing if we want to go ahead and try and get everybody moved over. And so instead of having to worry about it, that ASR is a really great thing, especially for one of the workloads we had. It was almost flawless coming over. Yep. So it's one of those not have to worry about it. And since we have our dedicated team, we don't have to worry about putting in a call to Microsoft, what's going to happen. We're going to pretty much be with you, holding your hand step by step all the way through.
Yeah. And then I wanted to talk to the
mic.
All right, look at my own mic. Sorry. So with the Azure commercial migration from Azure commercial item that I have up on the slide there, I wanted to talk to that a little bit because we've actually had a discussion with a few partners with regards to how to do this. Some folks and some of you in this room may actually be doing some work in the Azure commercial environment for a dev test environment. Like just how we were showing during the demo, that template that you create as part of that work in Azure commercial is perfectly valid in Azure government. So this is a common scenario that we actually see is people doing some initial dev work to come up with their basic architecture in Azure Commercial and their own subscriptions, whether they might be charging on a credit card, for example. But then when it's time to actually start work here within CMS, it's just a matter of taking those configuration files and then moving them into Azure Government. It's very straightforward.
Is that our last slide?
I think so. I think next one is the cost estimator.
The last thing I'll bring up for the onboarding, once everyone is in Azure, Splunk, i.e. for security, for logging, is the only thing that you have to use for shared services, and that's the only thing that's going to be peeking into your environment. You're going to have autonomy as the business owner and as your DevOps team. They're not going to have CMS. We're not going to be poking in, wanting to know everything, financial-wise and all that. That's going to be between you guys. So it's a little bit different if any of you guys are currently using AWS or any of the cloud services. We living more of the autonomy part, like I said. Once you're in, you're in. We're going to be there to support you any way we need, but it's not going to be, you're going to have to come to us asking, hey, I need X, Y, and Z. That's going to be up to you and your DevOps team. Run your environment as you see fit. We're here to help, but we're not going to be here to micromanage you.
So real quick, tab over, one of the windows I have open is the cost estimator. I think it's in that window.
No.
Or no, it's not that. It's not the WebEx. So I wanted to bring in one of these screens we have up here. It might be in a different. It's actually in a different instance, I think. We have the cost. Oh, there it is. It's the interactive Azure platform overview. Okay, that one. Yeah,
Sorry.
Okay, and then it's the first tab. So we have lots of windows open. We have the pricing calculator. This is something that when you're talking to us and you're looking at bringing stuff into Azure, this is a site that we can reference, right? And we work with you directly in kind of figuring this out. But it's an easy to use tool. You guys are perfectly capable of figuring out what stuff you need. But essentially, the power of this is to be able to take the components of the architecture that you think you're going to be needing, and just kind of adding them on. As simple as clicking on the particular item, and it will add to a particular list. So if I wanted to go ahead and click on something, however you want to do it. So you add these different components based on what your architecture looks like. And then at the very end, you can export a Excel spreadsheet with all the different components. And so for example, when you're building a VM, you can determine the type, quantity, how long that VM is going to be running. And so the charge will vary based on whatever the size of the VM is, times the number of hours that you have it running during the course of the day. I think it actually does it from a monthly perspective for hours or days. Yeah, there you go. So everything in Azure is a service, so there is a cost associated with it. So make sure that you talk to us to make sure that there might be something from an Azure perspective that, if you hadn't thought about it, maybe we can make sure that it gets included, like something like backup. Something is very simple as backup often gets overlooked. So it's just something you want to include into the list here. Cool. Go ahead and go back to the deck. And some of the stuff we've already gone through, so where to find us. We've gone through some of the service maps and the pricing calculator. If you're looking to find out about the latest and greatest from an Azure News perspective, we have blogs for both commercial Azure and for Azure Government. So the links here will take you there. We also have Channel 9. I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with Channel 9 on MSDN. That's a great video service that's how you like to consume your tech news. A lot of great interviews and demos and how-tos you can find on Channel 9. And then, of course, we have the Azure meetups. So every month, at the end of every month, I think it's the last Wednesday of every month, down in DC at 1776, we host a meetup for people who are interested in Azure Government, and we have different topics every time. So highly recommend you go down there. This link will take you to that site so you can find out what's going on. Typically it's the last week, but I think this last month, because we had the Cloud Forum and Mark Arsinovich was in town, we had it a little bit earlier, but typically speaking, it's the end of the month. Okay, I think that's it.
And everybody has an electronic copy of this, so the links will work?
Okay. All right, and then a couple last contact information here. The Cloud Operations email, when you have questions about coming onto Azure, those will get redirected to Rob. And then, of course, there's the contact information for both Ted, myself, and we have Kevin Fiftel on our team, one of our other architects here. Please feel free to reach out, contact us if you have any questions. That's it. So the mic's open. We still have, I think, 15 minutes left, a little bit less. So.
Just want to say thanks for your time. I know there's a lot of information in a short period of time. We really appreciate it.
So, there's a question there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Tim. So I'm a little confused with when Rob talked about, my simplistic mind is saying, I have to buy equipment from Dell, and then it gets put into this mag, and then the services are the ones that are per usage?
So what's going to happen when you get the business owner gets the contract with Dell, they're just getting the subscription.
They're the reseller, in
They're the
essence.
reseller.
Yeah.
So you're not buying any equipment, they're just,
Yes.
so you're, that's where the bill's going to go, it's going to come from Dell directly to the DevOps team. Instead of the long way where it's going to go now, it's pretty much the exact opposite.
Yes.
So you're not going to buy any equipment, you're just getting the bill from the reseller.
Question?
Jeff.
Thanks, Ken. So a question around security. Security is very important to what we do here because of the PHI and PII stuff, data we work with. So in terms of the FIPS 140-2 support, can you speak to kind of describe what is it like in practice to enable the security within Azure? And how do you guys use that capability to ensure security on data in motion and data at rest?
Well, I guess you're talking more about the certificate management and the key management with regards to that. Yeah, so. Well, maybe that's. Maybe that's a separate tech topic, so we can do sometime in the future for that.
Yes, yes.
But we
So,
can- we
but
can have a separate
the
discussion.
key, the takeaway message, one of the requirements that we have is to encrypt data at rest. And the encryption has to be FIPS 140-2 compliant, and that's what they have in place, and it's being certified to be used. So the key is that as a developer, as a contractor, you can just use their services without having to worry about whether it's FIPS or not, because it's already part of it.
The other thing is the Trust Portal and Security Center that I mentioned earlier actually covers all the encryption types and the different ways to do key management and all the different compliant ways to manage PII. And so I can follow up with Blake on a link specific to that information. But there's literally an encryption guide as well on how to do that. But I'll make sure that we get that over.
Any other questions? I know we have a few minutes. If you can step up to the mic, because we do have people on the phone, that'd be great.
Hi, this is Sumant Kapoor with Radiant Infotech. It was a very informative presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So as you had brought up a slide related to AWS, and then you had a price comparator. So have you done a price comparison between AWS and Azure? For me is why Azure and not AWS? I mean, can you help me answer the question that if I need to stand up an application, what would really help me incline one way or the other? And how does like per gigabyte of storage, for example, compare between Azure and AWS? And how does the compute, for example, if I have, you mentioned about a certain like RAM and CPU, how would the costs compare between Azure and AWS?
So is there a cost comparison? So we don't publish a cost comparison between them. I think for every application, it's going to depend on which services do you use. There are hundreds of applications that are available today inside of Azure. Some of that is going to depend on where does the traffic go? What's the utilization of it? What storage types do you choose with vendor A versus vendor B? What server sizes do you choose with vendor A versus vendor B? What style of analytics might you want to use, or business intelligence? Or there's a large number of variables in the question. What I will say is that for every application you want to create, if you would like us to create what it would cost in our model so that you can compare that with your Amazon resources as to what it would cost in their model, we're more than happy to do that. And we will help you with that on a case-by-case, step-by-step basis, and help you compare different cold storage options with faster storage options for all of those. And as was pointed out earlier, you have the option to mix those storage options for any given application. The short answer is there's not a blanket cost comparison because there's literally endless combinations of services that you might use to create and manage and secure an application. But on an application by application basis, we are certainly here to make that happen.
And one of the messages I understood was you do not want to have a situation where you're doing some services in one cloud environment and some services in the other cloud environment, especially if there's sort of data exchange between the two. So you either would want to either stick to Azure or AWS. I mean, is that a correct understanding, to have like storage compute?
There are
strictly in
certainly,
one environment?
so there are certainly scenarios where customers are doing, I'm doing business analytics in one cloud, but my data sits in another cloud, or all my data sits on premise, but my web front end is running in the cloud. We see that type of thing very commonly. What we would want to avoid in any scenario is exactly what you said, large data transfers going amongst these clouds, because those large data transfers are ultimately just going to drive up costs for CMS. What I know Microsoft does, what I think the majority of the cloud vendors do, is there's really not a charge for data going into that cloud. The way you're charged is data egressing that cloud. So you want to watch and be careful for how many clouds are you egressing for a given cycle of a workload. And that's certainly something to be aware of.
Yeah, and then sometimes it also depends on the service. Like, for example, so we talked about cognitive services earlier, right? Cognitive services is a fairly unique component, and eventually this is because going into the Gov Cloud, it's going to be accredited, right? So you may have a situation where people will have a bot running somewhere, but they want to be able to leverage the cognitive services API to plug into that, to have that natural effect. So that is an example of where you could have, where that would take place. It's not optimal, right? Because you have to have that, you have to take into account that data transfer, but it's something that happens.
You bring up a great question, though, or a great point, I think, with your question, in that for every application, I think it's worth it to run it by the Microsoft team, to run it by your architecture resources that you have here, so that you can look at, with everything else that CMS wants to do with that application. Maybe it's a course of e-discovery. Maybe you have security things you want to run on it. Maybe it's, where is the Splunk data for that app going to sit? There's a total cost of operations for that application that we can help you with every time, and make sure, which cloud should it go to.
To be really specific on that, just wanted to point out that the initial annual consumption estimate that you
need to engage Dell in the onboarding process through Robert. That annual consumption estimate is exactly what we're going to work with you. So whether you're an integrator or a line of business element here within CMS, and you want to take your application or your platform through that cost estimate process, that's what we're here to help you do. And we're very happy to do so. And it's part of the onboarding process.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And one more question for Quentin.
Hey, good morning. Quintus Brown with Halfacre. So my question is around cost containment and kind of helping customers help themselves, because oftentimes when customers are new to the cloud environment, they get their first bill and like, oh my God, is this AT&T or what? My cell bill joke. So my question is, are there controls, or how do you help the customer to make sure that they're not spending more than they plan to? Is it tying back to the IDM system where you've got kind of roles and responsibilities, or is there some other point, in your service where you're able to meter based on the customer having a budget and not wanting to exceed certain levels?
I'll start this, Jim, and if you want to take a second part of it, it's multi-components of what you just said. So the first I would say is, in a dev test environment specifically, the opportunity for you to be able to set quota limits. We have RBAC controls, as Jim mentioned, so I can literally say, I want to commit this funding to this project, and I want to make sure that people aren't using tools inside of Azure that are outside of where this money was intended, can be there. I have the option to be able to say, I don't want you to be able to go over this budget. I don't want you to be able to use a server larger than X or storage more than Y, server classes outside of what we've set up. There's also a budgeting tool, and you can literally look every single day and see exactly what is this application costing you. I would say part of making sure that we don't wind up at the end of the month with an extraordinary bill is to make sure that someone is actually looking at it as we're deploying it. There are tools that you can leverage, like ASR, Azure Site Recovery, that could say, hey, let's put this application in the cloud and fail it over, over a weekend to see what it would look like from a standard utilization perspective to help get you started. So part of that goes into upfront planning, part of that goes into RBAC controls, but the option to actually set quotas on what different people can use to be able to limit that is there as well. Yeah. Jim, do you want to add to that?
Absolutely. And so part of when we talked a little bit before, we have that notion of that enrollment hierarchy. And so we have the enrollment, then we have a bunch of departments, and then accounts that feed into this, that go to the subscriptions. At that department level, we can actually put a kind of a dollar amount, kind of a budget that can be used as a notification threshold, for example. I don't think we have a capability to shut things down, so I don't think we wanted to be that draconian and say, hey, you have a machine, we're going to just stop it, right, when you hit that budget number. But it is a way to at least get alerts into that. And that's just from the enrollment portal perspective. We talked a lot about the Azure management portal. The enrollment portal is a separate location, separate login. Let me be more clear. It is the same login that you would use, but it is a separate endpoint. And that endpoint can show you kind of what your consumption looks like at that level, especially if you have access to multiple subscriptions.
Does it happen in OMS or outside of OMS?
The enrollment portal is outside of OMS, but OMS is another tool that you could use absolutely as well. In addition to Power BI being probably a third tool that you could leverage for something like that.
All right, thanks.
So we got 2 minutes, and unfortunately I do have another meeting, and I know the auditorium is only reserved till noon. So I do want to say thank you to Jim and Kent for the information. I know there's a lot of questions. Robert and his team is available to answer a lot of those. The way I look at it from a CMS perspective, we have a BMW, we have a Mercedes. Sometimes it's an option, which one you like better, where you feel comfortable with, right, in terms of driving, in terms of the utilization. But yes, the architecture plays a significant role in terms of how the data is moving and flowing. So there's a lot of things that are always situational, but I mean, this gives us competition, which is what CMS wants. Interoperability is key, so I always say that from the very beginning. I want to make sure that I can talk all the way from AWS to Azure if I need to, and I think that's what we accomplished this. And be open, no silos. Even if we're in the cloud, we want to make sure that all the systems are open. So there's a lot of excitement about this new offering that CMS is embarking on, so there'll be more to come. So I want to say thank you, and all the information will be available, because that was one of the questions. For those internal are in SharePoint, for those are external in Zone. If you don't know how to get into Zone, go into Twitter and look for a hashtag CMS Converge, and the instructions on how to get that login and information will appear, and then you can get the information and the slides from there. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll see you next year in January.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Great information.